Okay, this is Margaret Parent, and I'm here with
Trevor Buttrum. Hi.
And we are talking about career planning with the mycareer resources that the Institute has created. And in particular today, we're talking about in-demand skills for the P&C insurance industry. Quite excited to do that. It should be a good conversation. Do we have the majority of our people online? I believe so. Excellent. So then maybe we'll begin. Okay, so for your information, the webinar is being recorded. So everybody who attends will receive a link and a copy of the slides. And while you're here for this hour and 15 minutes to about 2:15, we would like to encourage you to make the most of the opportunity that we have here to ask myself and or Trevor questions. There is the Q&A chat box that would allow you to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll certainly open it up at the end for questions, so hopefully you'll have some. Today's agenda, we set out with an idea that we would like to talk about competencies in general, and we're going to define that as a combination of knowledge, skills, experience, and attitudes. This is a little bit of providing a little bit of insight and sneak peek at some of the findings coming from the 2017-18 demographic research. So we have some insight into in-demand skills and how some of the roles and skills in the industry are changing, which we're quite excited to share, and certainly what's in demand now and skill sets that will be required in the future. Then we're going to walk through a couple of tools and resources that the mycareer website have available that can help assess your core skills and competencies. And so some self-assessment tools there, and help you identify some skill gaps and or help you with some strategies to build the skills and experience going forward. So that's kind of what we set out to be our agenda for today. And so Trevor's going to talk to us a little bit about what competencies can mean for all of us.
Great. Excuse me. Thanks, Margaret. I'm excited to be here today to talk a little bit about the way that we build skills and how we leverage our experience in the changing reality that we're experiencing in the insurance industry. Just wanted to share a little bit off the top my background and experience profile. I'm a career counselor by designation, so meaning that I've worked with people throughout the course of my now 15+ year career in figuring out how they might be able to leverage what they know, what they're good at, and where they've had some experience or gained some skill set, and how to leverage that into a career path that's meaningful and impactful for them. And so when we talk a lot about competency in career counseling and a lot about sort of how you build them and acquire them, and sometimes skills and competency are used interchangeably. And we hear that in the workforce, we hear that in sometimes even in job ads, what we're really asking for in terms of skills or what might actually be a competency. And so what I wanted to highlight on this slide is that a competency is actually often defined as a combination of things. So it will be your knowledge or your education that you're bringing to the table. It may be things that you've learned on the job or through a formal learning process, as well taking a look at our attitudes and core values, the things that not just what we know or how we do the work, but actually what perspective or what insight or what value system are we overlaying into this framework, and of course skills. When we look at it from an institute standpoint and what we actually wanted to include in the mycareer context was also layering in experience. And so you can know something, you can have acquired a skill set and know how to do something, and you might have the right attitude in place, but in some cases, before you're ready to take the next step in your career, it does require logging some experience or some application of that competency. And so we wanted to make sure that that was reflected in each of the tools and resources. And I think it's really important in thinking about your career planning is also being able to assess that readiness and being able to know, am I ready for the next step, or am I ready for a bit of an increased scope and breadth of my next challenge and opportunity? There is also a sweet spot when it comes to our development, and that's kind of the intersecting point. And this is important in terms of benchmarking where you are now in your current role and also in our current workplace reality. and then thinking about where you want to go next and which areas sort of may need to expand in order to get there. So it might be that you've had a lot of different experiences as maybe an insurance underwriter and seen a couple of different risks, maybe different clients that you've had the opportunity to service. You've acquired some really good skills on the job. And maybe you have a really great analytical kind of mind and perspective. It might be that the next step is to actually take that advanced CIP or to grow your competency through knowledge. It might be the next step might be growing additional skill set and getting into a different specialty or a different area of the business. So each of these can kind of expand or contract based on and be applied in different ways. And so that sweet spot is where you are now, but ultimately where you want to go is where you want to adjust that sweet spot accordingly. There's also some really great research that's been done recently around skill acquisition and what shapes sort of what goes into a skill set or what we bring to the table. And what's interesting from over the last decade, we know that the shelf life or half-life of skills was predicted to be about 5 years. So in each of the job profiles, that are available within the industry, we knew that these skills would typically be what's required for that 5 to 10 year period. With technology coming into the workplace, we've seen that accelerate dramatically. And so I think right now, particularly within the insurance marketplace and within the industry itself, we see a lot of technology coming into play. And so I think we're going to see some significant change in order for us to keep up. We need to be constantly adapting or repurposing or reframing the way that we view our skill sets. It may be developing new ones entirely. It may be as well looking at a different lens and using our perspective differently. But I think it's an exciting time, and it shouldn't necessarily be viewed as scary to have to do that. There are lots of different ways that we can acquire skill and competency, and I think the Institute and certainly the mycareer tools position as well to be able to take stock of that. It's predicted that 1 in 4 adults by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is reporting a mismatch between their current skills and the qualifications required for their job. So sometimes that's about upskilling, sometimes that's about, again, that repurposing or reframing, or it might also be taking a look and seeing where you might be able to apply the skill set that you have in a more concrete way.
We'll talk a little bit from the demographic research what some of the executives answered regarding skills needed in the future. So that'll be an interesting juxtaposition with this as well.
Absolutely. So when we talk about it in the context of mycareer, we wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on the progression that all of the, aspects or areas of the career maps that are available on the site are mapped to, and how we view talking about careers. So rather than junior, intermediate, and senior, we actually use a progression that's more about foundational positioning or building, enhancing, and mastery, and that can mean different things. So foundation, it might be when you're brand new to the industry, or perhaps transitioning into a new area of the business or a new role. It might be even something like transitioning from personal lines to commercial lines. Building, working within a defined scope and parameters, so being able to apply knowledge that you've built either through formal education or while on the job, or to apply skill sets within a defined scope and parameters, enhancing that skill set so that you're continuing to be more of a consultant or a subject matter expert that's informing the work of others. And mastery, the ability to sort of work outside of the box and knowing, being that deeper dive into the subject matter expertise and maybe having skill sets that others don't within the organization and being able to apply those, or being able to be a subject matter expert consult within a variety of functions, not just within your own department. And when we see that kind of lived out in each of the roles, so the first one being broker agent service, I would want you to think about, if this is your role or within whatever your role may be, where do you see your skills and experience currently falling? Are you within foundation? Are you within building? Are you within enhancing or mastery? And you can see how each of these might differ in different contexts. So from a foundational standpoint, you can see your core skills are really about the fundamentals. and really honing your craft within the industry. So they would be understanding how that particular role in the broker agent perspective, how a policy might work, communicating with clients, how all of that comes into play. Then from a building perspective, it's building on the knowledge and expertise and starting to apply in a variety of different contexts and leveraging that the experience that you've had to date to move forward. And it's, being able to negotiate and maybe taking a look at different types of or more complex risk, liaising with underwriters, that kind of thing, maybe influencing a little bit more. In the enhancing phase, that becomes, maybe being more in the account management type role, being able to, act independently based on the direction of the producer, based on what they're bringing in. And then into mastery, that's a little bit more strategic in the thinking and in the application of the skill set. The problems become a little bit more complex, and there's a little bit more teaching or consulting that might be involved in those areas.
At a master's stage.
At the master's stage.
So we picked just 4 examples of skills and experience off of the 12 career maps on the mycareer website. So broker agent service was the first example. Here's an underwriter. Underwriter, and same thing, you can kind of see that progression nicely, and would encourage you to really take a look at the mycareer site, the full career map, but also there's a downloadable PDF, which is a nice summary, which includes the knowledge section, a little bit on skills and experience, certainly looking at attitudes and core values, what really goes into shaping that competency that we talked about, and then a couple of additional resources. But that can be a nice goal sheet, a nice starting place to kind of have in your cubicle or to have when you're having a conversation with your manager about your career. And so would encourage you to look at it in that context as well. Let's take a look at risk manager. This one's a little bit different. Recognizing that risk management, either you're coming into the role with a significant body of experience outside of the industry, so that might be engineering or in the business world, or you might be coming at it from a role like being a broker or an underwriter, for example, where you've mastered and are now really lending that subject matter expertise in terms of a strategic plan for managing and containerizing risk from a risk management perspective. So that's why it comes in at the building phase rather than necessarily being mapped to the foundational, and then proceeds relatively quickly right into mastery, because you come in, you learn a little bit about, you're either replacing the insurance knowledge that you need or building a little bit of the subject matter expertise that you might need, and can progress relatively quickly into the mastery stage, depending on sort of your scope and area of expertise. And you can see the skills being reflected there as well. And then as well, we map to leadership, so technical and people management. And technical management is really that subject matter expert or consultant versus that people leader. And those are, and when we get into the research findings, we'll see that those roles are actually becoming more and more critical in the role. And so here we've actually matched to the CIP Society National Leadership Awards category around emerging and established leadership competency. And you can see some of the core skills really looking at when you move into the emerging, it's about becoming that subject matter expert within your unit, and then established, it's becoming a little bit more prominent within the organization. So you might see, for example, a technical lead within an underwriting department, and then perhaps within the established piece, it might actually be an operational lead or a COO, for example, within that. So that was, thank you. That was 4 examples, and as I say, there are 12 career maps on the website for mycareer. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on those, and hope that you will find your place and identify where you are on a career map that suits you, or if you're looking to make a move, explore a career map that might be actually new or different for you. And you can see how that ties in nicely to that developmental sweet spot we were talking about, right? In terms of if you benchmark your knowledge, your attitudes and core values, as well as your skills and experience profile, you can kind of get a good feel for where you're at and where your readiness might be in terms of the next steps, or what your next evolution might look like. Yeah. Okay, so that was a little bit of an introduction to mycareer. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the research findings, and then we're going to come back to my career to do some self-assessment tools and tips. So a little bit to feed into our skills discussion, we have some findings from the demographic research, and here's a little bit of context for you. So through 2017, we've been in field surveying HR professionals, gathering a census of 48 organizations, surveying employees, and hopefully maybe some of you were employees that participated in our survey. That'd be great. And we also surveyed 230 executives all through the process, and we were in field for quite a bit of the latter part of 2017. And then Conference Board of Canada, who we contracted with to do all this research, has been doing the analysis and writing the research reports. And I'm currently in the process of editing, as well as then translating and designing and coming up with some fun infographics and all of that will be released in September. So at this moment, though, you're getting a little bit of a preview of some of the findings that are not officially released. So welcome to this. This is great. And a little bit of, we pulled relevant details that are part of this discussion around in-demand skills. Okay. So a little bit that is the key trends that are coming out of the research, and there's more than just these three, but these are certainly part of what is causing a talent disruption, if you will, within the industry. So there are high retirement rates and continuing early retirement within the industry. Accelerated technological advances, we talked a little bit about that already, and that kind of evolution in the industry is having impact obviously on the workforce. And then an identified gap in management and leadership skills, particularly for this agile and technological advanced industry that it is seemingly we're to become in the next 5 to 10 years. So a different type or more additional skill sets are needed within the management and leadership to make really tough decisions. So that's kind of 3 points. And so just to walk through this a little bit. So the retirement projection, so this is a chart indicating that, for example, 35% of those currently in management roles are likely and most likely to retire by 2027. And in actuality, and in the fullest report, we have other data that actually indicates that it's not a 10-year time span. It's actually the majority of these retirements will actually happen in the next 5 years. And certainly that was kind of the findings that were coming out of the 2012 study. So the takeaways from this chart are management has high significant retirement projections anticipated. Information technology, which is really interesting when we start to have a conversation about technology is going to save the day. And we are likely to lose quite a few of those who are currently working in our IT departments across the board. Risk management is another one where it tends to be that kind of a mature worker moves into that role, into a building and mastery stage. So some of our risk managers are high potential for retiring. That's a small proportion of the industry. So what's more worrisome, of course, would be like underwriting. And so 30% of those currently working in underwriting are likely to retire within the next 10 years. And you can see it goes on a little less for claims, but still pretty significant, and down from there. Actuarial is kind of an interesting one because we ask for a role description of what people are in at the moment, and a lot of actuarials move into management roles. So it's kind of actuarials at the moment have a fairly young profile. More detail probably than you need, but there you go. So 35% of management. Here's a few other things to look at, and I mentioned that retirement age still continues to be pretty low. So in 2007, the median retirement age was just like 59.5 or 60. Now in 2017, it hasn't gone up much more than. It's currently median retirement age in 2017 is 61. The general labor market in Canada is retiring at 64. So we're lower than the general labor market in Canada. So the projections coming from Conference Board of Canada are 27% of the current workforce are expected to retire by 2027. And it actually is probably about 15% of that are expected to go by 2022, and the remainder, kind of 12%, would be in the second part of that decade. Key parts of this: Saskatchewan has high retirement projections, BC has high retirement projections, Crown corporations are about to lose 40% of their workforce in the next 10 years. Saskatchewan and BC high numbers are probably because of the Crown corporations a little bit as well. And then when we break down management, so the previous slide indicated 35% of those in management and leadership roles were likely to retire in the next 10 years. When we break that down to senior managers, it's actually closer to 50%. So every other one who is currently in a senior management role is likely to retire. Middle managers are 39%, and information technology was that high, 38%. The significance a little bit here as well is that if we think a pipeline of middle managers to senior managers, and that if we lose the senior managers, we can move middle managers into those roles. This suggests that we have high retirement rates at both the senior and the middle management role. And so that's where some of the leadership concerns are coming in as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about leadership skills in a second. This was a question that we asked of executives who answered our survey. And we asked of all of these trends that are taking place and certainly being discussed in the industry, what is the potential for this to really impact trends on skill requirements in the workforce? So how much of an impact will big data and analytics have? And when we look at this chart, the blue is to a great extent and the orange is to some extent. So big data and analytics, big impact on the skill requirements in the P&C industry. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are anticipated to have big impact. Digital engagement of customers, so that forward-facing through customer, trying to meet the needs of customers through digital platforms, big impact. Cyber threats are only going to continue to go up. Automation and how we can eliminate some of the paper trail and make everything a little bit more automated. Certainly, we've been moving in that direction, but you can see that there's greater impact anticipated. The Internet of Things and all of that fits with that kind of big data, but that increased connectivity. And all of that is making everyone a little bit concerned, or a lot concerned, about the fact that the people that we would need to help with all of that, big data, artificial intelligence, digitalization, all of that, are some of the same skills that every other industry is going after. So there's big, currently and much anticipated increased competition for the talent we need in our industry, along with every other industry that's going after the same talent. So a little bit of insight there in terms of, and maybe this isn't too surprising, but maybe it is, in terms of how much the industry is really anticipating that these trends will not only come into the industry, but also have great impact on the people who are working in the industry. The next slide here is talking about skills in particular. So if that is, if all of those factors are having implications on the industry at large, then here is, how the perception of the importance of skills for the industry. And so what's interesting, so one of the things, just in terms of your career planning and how you're thinking about your skills, you'll see that if we start at the bottom of this list, making sure that you have the industry-specific knowledge and experience and the job-specific technical knowledge you need is critical. Okay, that's not going away, not surprisingly, but it's not the only thing that's going to keep getting you ahead, okay, because all of these other factors are now layers on top of making sure you have not only the basic knowledge, but also are continuing to enhance that insurance-specific knowledge. And then what's interesting about this slide, and we can hear in the news, people certainly talk about soft skills. The latest is referring to them as human skills, which I guess is supposed to differentiate between robots or artificial intelligence. I thought we were all human to begin with, so that's kind of not my favorite description. In career counseling and in our lexicon, we've been using workplace critical skills. And so customer service, creativity and flexibility and adaptability in so much change, as well as thinking outside of the box and thinking about new ways of doing things, or some of that problem solving that requires a different way of thinking about things. Teamwork, because as soon as you get more complicated risks that need to be escalated and consulted about, you need to bring a team together that needs to communicate well. And so you can see where all of those types of workplace skills are becoming fairly critical. They are much more important than even the industry-specific knowledge, but not to do away with that industry-specific knowledge. What you can see that in the arrow, in the parts that aren't identified, is some of that technical knowledge, the analytic knowledge, that kind of innovation. These are skills that either you can work to enhance, but there are also a lot of the skills that are being recruited into the industry. Leadership and management is there and is identified as really, really much more important going forward. And that's a little bit about, nuances of leadership and management for a new world or for all the changes that are coming forward in the industry. And so we'll talk a little bit more about leadership skills and how that's changing. But just in terms of all of that, like all of the emerging trends that are coming into the industry and the skill sets that are needed, there is lots of worry and or speculation that it is automation is going to eliminate roles. And so in principle, from the research, what we'd say is there's probably three kind of buckets that are happening here. So one bucket is that, yes, there are probably some roles involving some risks, simple risks, that may start to phase out. Not unlike over the century of insurance, how we don't have as many people filing paperwork and that. So some roles do evolve and change. So there will be some evolution in that and some roles will be phased out. But most of the roles will just have more tools and analytics and data at their disposal to be able to assess risk or have more capacity to personalize risk assessment, those kinds of things. Some of that customer-driven demands based on analytics and based on Internet of Things or the big data and all the analytics. And I'm sure most of you are already starting to see that some of your organizations are already trying to figure out how to deal with all of the data. And so ideally, you probably either already have some tools or you can anticipate that some additional tools are coming your way. And part of that is understanding what the data tells you. And so that's where some of that critical thinking and understanding still needs to be part of your jobs.
Yeah, and I think what's really kind of at the forefront for me when we talk about the list of skills that you presented is that it's a blend of technical, it's a blend of sort of those workplace critical skills. It's also influenced heavily by attitudes and core values, right? It's about yes, you might be able to say that you can communicate, but can you communicate with the intent that your organization wants you to communicate? And is it business communication? Is it the ability to build rapport, build those relationships, and leverage the data and take something that's really incredibly complex and make it easier for people to understand. I think as risks become more and more complicated, or there might be more sort of elements involved, or you're working with more cross-functional teams, it's being able to explain your subject matter expertise and what you're bringing to the conversation in ways that everybody else, it resonates with them and that they can take away sort of what that's informing or what that's about. And, data scientists and people who are working in, the actuarial function, more and more they're being asked to step out from behind their models and computers and being able to, take that into informing the business function. And more those who are doing that business function are needing to understand sort of that analytical world and the technology and the modeling so that their decisions are also being A, data-driven, and B, informed by, and rightly informed by those pieces of information that are now at our disposal, right? And really leveraging that and making it a much more, I think, robust experience for everyone. And certainly from our consumer perspective, they're really excited about some of the change that's coming in the ways that insurance companies evaluate and assess risk, and some of the tools that they'll have at their disposal to be able to even just access product or access that claims adjuster, those kinds of things.
And that was part of the interesting process we went through when we were creating the career maps on mycareer. It was with our HR advisors, they were already identifying some of these skills. So we added creativity to underwriters because that's what was needed. Really good communication skills and the ability to make complex things understood was added to actuary. And so those kinds of roles were already starting to happen, and certainly there's going to be more of that going forward. So that's kind of, the big bucket in the middle is most roles will start to involve more of these skill requirements. And then there is anticipation of quite a few more and different types of roles being introduced into the industry. And so that's where some of and you're probably already seeing this as well, like there's directors of innovation, and then there are data scientists being brought into the business analysts to try and figure out how all the technology works. And so there are new roles being created, partly within IT departments, but not exclusively within IT departments, because actually when an organization is trying to go digital, it actually isn't just IT that's driving that, it's actually the business driving it with technology to support it. So you can start to see where there's a whole bunch more roles that are created. So far from the research, there is a projection that the overall headcount in the industry is not going down. But some of the roles will change, and more influx of technology type roles will increase that count in the short term for sure.
One of the interesting things you were talking about, that business analyst role, and one of the pieces that really resonated with me is people describing business analysts as bilingual. So being able to speak the language of technology, but also being able to speak the language of the business, right? Yeah. And so really integrated in terms of being able to help all of the change and the progress that we're seeing in the industry to drive that forward, and even being able to translate that into the product offerings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so the last point on this, you can see where management and leadership roles would also need to be able to talk multi-language like that as well in order to make some of the really big decisions that organizations are going to want to be considering, or to move down the path, or how to become really digital and technology, and some of those decision making that will be required to change the way insurance has been delivered in order to meet consumer demands. And so those are really big strategic decisions that have significant impact. And so, management and leadership roles will certainly need to be able to have those kind of capacities.
And I think that's why it was so interesting and also so important when we were having the conversations about the career maps, where HR and particularly talent leaders were zeroing in on leadership competency needs to be built in evidence throughout career, in order for us to be able to assess and trust that those who are in the leadership position are able to have that big perspective, right? So if you can demonstrate that kind of thinking, or the evidence-based decision making, those kinds of things early on in career, that your potential and your capacity for these kinds of leadership roles down the line is being nurtured and developed from day one, versus sort of the assumption that, okay, so you've mastered some operations, now go lead. And I think there's quite a bit of evidence that that's not necessarily the best way to do it. And B, I think the insurance industry has always been based on sort of that mentorship and conversation and growing. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that translates into the reality.
Yeah. So you are encouraged to go to the career maps. You'll see that leadership, and there are tips and ways in which you can demonstrate leadership even at a foundation level to building. It's not only at the mastery level, and it's certainly not only in a technical or people management capacity. So you're encouraged to do that. This is from the executive survey. Harvard Business Review. That's part of the reports that Conference Board of Canada has put together. And so these are competencies that have been voted most important for management positions going forward. And so particularly for disruptive times and/or for the significant changes that are coming forward. And so just as a case in point, so the capacity of displaying technical or professional expertise. So knowing your insurance alone is, middle of the pack in terms of all of these competencies that are identified as being ideal for the leader of the future. And so the capacity to inspire and motivate others, to solve problems and analyze issues, high integrity and honesty, certainly goes to credibility. Yes, you need to drive for results, but there needs to be, really good, powerful communication, the collaboration, the teamwork, building relationships. So you can see how it is a lot of facilitation and a lot of visionary capacity to not only want to set a strategic direction, but then also to inspire and motivate everybody else to buy into that direction as well. So lots and lots of competencies that HR is looking for in leadership within organizations right now, and or if it's not there, then looking to build those skills within people and or bring into the industry. Because there's certainly lots of leadership that's going to need to be in place for future decision making.
I think that this list also really speaks to the interdisciplinary teams and the cross-functional teams that we're envisioning for the industry, to be able to bring those people together, the right voices, the right perspectives, to be able to inform, the vision and the reality to drive the business forward, right? And I think that, it just demonstrates again that we need a variety of skill sets within the industry and a variety of expertise. And so honing and being able to articulate those skills and being able to demonstrate at the forefront, like, this is what I'm bringing to the table. It's nice to be able to position yourself for those opportunities to be on task force, to engage the industry in a broader perspective, to really, I think, take those next steps in your career. And so I think that ties in nicely to sort of the need to assess your skills.
Nice segue, Trevor. Yes,
right?
There we go. So with that as the highlights and sneak peek from the demographic research on skills, yes, let's give you some tools to take a look at yourself and see where you are on some of these competencies.
And so when we were putting together my career, there was some discussion, about wanting to create tools and resources that you could leverage for career management. And so there's actually a whole section devoted to that on the site, where you can, there are tip sheets and there are also assessments that you can leverage that help you kind of take stock. Benchmark is the word of the day in terms of where you are and what your next steps might be, and also helping you just figure out, I think anyway, particularly when zeroing in on skills, what's in your toolkit currently and what are you continually adding to it or wanting to add to it, so that you can be ready for what's coming down the pipeline in terms of trends and disruption within the industry, but also position yourself to navigate towards the opportunities that you see as interesting, rewarding, and valuable to you. So the first step in that is really taking a look at which phase are you at in your skill development. So when you think about the skills that you've presented, and we'll take a look at a list in a moment, like, where are you sitting in terms of your current skill set? So are you at the foundation stage? Would you say that you're building, you're enhancing, or you're at that mastery phase within your current role? And also think about the current realities. So how important are these kinds of skills in the work that you do on a day-to-day basis? So not at all, or right through to extremely important. And that importance rating is important for right now, but it's also to think about how important might they be in the future, and that might help to identify sort of where you take them. And so let's take a look at some of the skills that we've got on the assessment, and you'll see they'll mirror a lot of what we saw reflected in the demographic research as executives identifying and HR sort of saying these are the areas that people really need to focus in on. And certainly reflected in the work of the Harvard Business Review. So when we see the emphasis on things like client service or the data analytics or the analytical skills, the ability to connect with it as part of a team or to leverage those interpersonal skills, being a part of the industry engagement, your leadership skill set, maybe even things like financial acumen, and being able to maybe work on things like pricing or reserving in the industry. Those are sort of key. And so you can see how these are applicable to many roles within the sector, but how the importance may shift depending on where you're positioned. So for example, if you're in a forward-facing role, like in claims or on the broker side of the business, you might be placing more emphasis on sort of that client service or relationship building. But if even in the actuarial space, we're seeing that the communication and the interpersonal skills are key in terms of being able to build relationships cross-functionally. So although the importance rating may have been lower previously, I think we're starting to see that creep up. And so it's not to say everything on this list is of equal importance in your role, but it's to consider that it's going to be a balance, right? So.
Yeah, it's good to then assess that in terms of in a kind of current state and then perhaps a future state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, when you do put it in the context of foundation, right through to mastery with each of these skill sets too, you can see that it's probably a bit of a mixed bag for you. And so in order to sort of benchmark like the reality of where you want to go or what might be changing in your role, you may find that there are ways that you can enhance your skill set to be responsive to that change and or set you on the course, right? So some good thinking work to be done there. As you move through that assessment, I'll start to identify sort of the top 5, right? And consider the skills that are used more frequently or have the greatest level of importance in your role. If you're feeling a little bit unsure about how to assess a particular skill set, sometimes self-assessment, we tend to either rank a little bit low, or sometimes we don't have enough lens and we feel we're really good at something, that maybe somebody might be able to guide us in that this is where you're actually sitting. It might be good to have a conversation with a trusted colleague or a mentor within the industry. Certainly your manager can factor in here, but know that there may be others, on your team or within the organization that can help here as well. They really serve more as the validator, the manager and HR, right? In terms of once you've done that assessment, you can kind of have a conversation a little bit about sort of where you see your skill set currently and where this might align to either development plans or some of the career conversations that you're having down the line. Let's talk a little bit about identifying gaps. And I think, Margaret, you alluded and nicely hit the nail on the head too when we were talking about the skills that sometimes there are gaps within the industry. And one that we know that's coming and moving is certainly in the leadership competency space. Whether there might also be, areas in the data analytics and certainly in the analysis and critical thinking kind of type work that's coming down the pipe. Where do you rank in those areas? Think about those first, but also see, based on trends or things that are driving the industry forward, where some of the gaps may be for you. But some of the questions that you can ask yourself as well, just from a personal standpoint in terms of readiness for the next steps in your career, is where are you now and where do you want to go? And they seem like fairly easy questions, but they're really important to take stock of from a holistic perspective. Skills is one area, but think about back to that competency piece, your knowledge, your core attitudes and values, and your experiences all feed into this as well. But in terms of skill set, where are you now and where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself, whether it's in a different specialty, whether it's in your current role, but with a little bit increased scope and breadth, or even looking for transition into different areas of the business, whether that's leadership or moving into even a different, maybe transition from underwriting to claims, for example. Identify how your collection of skills and experiences can help you get there. So remember that it's often about your done list, right? It's about the things that you've done previously in your work and how you leverage those experiences that can inform how you might face a new challenge. People often talk about, well, I don't know how to do that one piece. And it's like, well, is it like something else that you've done in your work previously? Or does it follow a similar process? Or if you knew that piece of information, could it inform how you might approach or tackle this particular problem or challenge? So identify how it might be leveraged or transferable can really go a long way as well. Then it's important to understand which ones are sort of the most crucial, and becoming more confident in showcasing those skills. So for example, an underwriter may not be required to give presentations that often, but for someone in business development, it's virtually an essential skill, right? So if you have the desire to move into business development, how as an underwriter could you get more engaged in some of the presentations or some of the work? So whether it's taking the lead in a meeting with a particular broker and presenting some of the findings of the risk, whether it's maybe some of the internal functions that are happening, just being able to get out there and in front, or maybe it's even an activity that you're taking on outside of work, that you're bringing into the workplace when you're talking about your development plans, so that people can see that you're owning that skill and might be ready to move into those kinds of opportunities. When we talk about sort of the continued skill development and career conversations, I think this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting in terms of, you know, how do you navigate this and how do you bring build skill sets to the next, I guess, take your skills to the next level. And I think it's really important to have a plan and to really think about it as a holistic plan. It's not just kind of a once and done, well, I played a team sport, so therefore I can do teamwork. It's important to see that that's one facet of teamwork. Are there other ways that you can evidence that particular skill set or that particular competency as a whole? And so whether it's maybe you went to a seminar or an event that informs some of your knowledge, or maybe you took a course that gives you a little bit of perspective and the technical know-how. It's certainly practicing things on the job and actually asking for stretch assignments or adding it into your core responsibilities. Frequently what we hear from HR about those who are being looked at for promotion or being looked at for evolution in their role, often that happens because they're already behaving or functioning as if they're in that role already, right? And so I think there's some really nice opportunity there for you to identify the skill sets you want to work on and start to bring those into your day-to-day, or if they're a skill that you already possess and they're required in the role that you ultimately want, how do you incorporate them so that people can see that you have that skill and capacity? Volunteering outside of work, we've talked a little bit about that, and I think in my own career, having the opportunity to serve on volunteer boards of directors, or being able to engage in professional associations, or taking on different activities in my personal life have given me insight and perspective that's been helpful in terms of management or leadership capacity that I may not have been able to demonstrate as early on when I was an individual contributor. And I think for people in your day-to-day work, that's one of the best ways to be able to get exposure or opportunity, and often is overlooked. And certainly the importance of engaging in industry activities and networking. I think from my perspective, and I think certainly that of the CIP Society, is that it's important to stay engaged, within the industry and to give back in meaningful ways, whether it's through, being a subject matter expert who might be consulting on something like a textbook here at the Institute, or having the opportunity to be active in a professional association and take on a leadership role, maybe the committee or council level here at the Institute, or broader in like the Ontario Insurance Adjusters Association, what have you, or the
QA
Insurance Women's Association.
OIA,
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of associations in the industry.
And ways to give back and to be engaged, but also to broaden your network. I think one of the things that we know is coming as a complexity of risk is having more people in your network to be able to consult with or to leverage their expertise can inform your practice. And sometimes when you've done something once with the advice and consultation from others, it actually then becomes your knowledge and expertise. It's sort of a mentorship type capacity. So I think that's important to leverage as well. The other sort of nuance here is, although you may be developing skills and that you're growing, you've done some really good assessment and thinking work about your skills and experiences and how they relate to in-demand realities in the insurance industry, it's important that you not leave your manager and HR out of that loop, right? If you do that in isolation, it's not necessarily going to benefit you to the fullest potential. So having a more meaningful dialogue with your manager about sort of where you see yourself going and the skills that you want to develop. Also, maybe even a conversation about the changing reality in your role. We'll talk a little bit about how you need to think about the skills of the future and what some of the cues that change is coming.
Yeah.
And also, I think, just having a more robust career conversation when you're given the opportunity. There's some great resources, again, on my career in the for career management section about preparing for those performance and career conversations and really evidencing your skills, your contributions, the knowledge building that you've done, the attitudes and core values that you demonstrate, and how to bring that to the table so that everyone can see it and really offer some perspective about where that might take you from a career perspective. So certainly engage in the conversation and talking about it can also help you get more comfortable with the idea of continuing to build and evolve in your skills and experiences.
Well, and that's certainly what we heard from HR when we were building the career resources. It was part of the impetus for building my career was that HR would welcome employees to want to have more of a conversation about career development. Hopefully there are tools there that you can access and get comfortable with that kind of conversation. Certainly that will help position you for possible move, change, additional skill set building, all that. That's great. One last slide or so.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit about considering skills for the future. So I think having an understanding of your organization, its priorities, that's just good career practice, right? You work there, you have a vested interest, but also just understanding the shifts in the reality. You may see, internal meetings or have the opportunity to engage in town hall type discussions. Take those to heart and really kind of zero in on what it is that the organization is setting as a priority and direction. Talk about those with your manager. Keep an eye on industry publications and trade publications in terms of how those priorities might fit into the industry as a whole and some of the change or shifts that we're seeing. Certainly being curious. Anytime that something is happening or changing or evolving, or tools being introduced or new sort of modes of thinking or process reviews, thinking about implications, broader term for client yourself, and also embracing that as an opportunity to see the business drive forward as opposed to, oh, there's change and disruption.
Yeah.
So therefore I'm out of a job or nervous or uncomfortable. I think that it's important to take, again, stock of your done list, the skills and experiences that you're bringing to the table, the competencies that you've built over the course of your career, and how could they be applied in the changing environment, right? And learning about sort of those and embrace changes in company culture. So whether it's an adoption of technology or an adoption of a different practice or a new product line, those kinds of things. And certainly taking insight and inspiration from your leaders when you see your manager and have the opportunity to engage in dialogue, or even senior management. Yeah. We're seeing more and more openness and readiness to talk about the overall direction of the organization and seize those opportunities to really engage and be a part of the conversation. I think too, events like CIP Society Symposium or places where you can get up close and personal as we're
leaders,
with some leaders, I think those are really good dialogue opportunities to really just understand what's sort of on their minds, keeping them up at night, and what they're thinking about in terms of steering the organizations in the directions that the industry needs them to go.
Yeah. All good advice for that, for skills for the future. And then last word from my career.
Yeah, we're really just zeroing in on those downloadable summaries again. A lot of what we talked about, giving you that career perspective, the attitudes and core values, the knowledge, skills, and experience, shaping that full competency profile within the role that you're currently in or the roles that you're ultimately thinking about can be really, really useful tool in terms of informing some decisions that you might make about skill development or the next courses that you take or the attitudes and core values that you want to demonstrate.
Yeah. The experiences you'd like to add?
Yeah, absolutely.
The 10 core operational roles, and then career maps for people and technical management on the My Career website. And so just presuming you all knew the URL, but here you go. So insuranceinstitute.ca/mycareer will get you there to all of these really great resources, to the career maps, to an understanding of how you can apply leadership in each context, to identifying the skills and experiences at each stage of foundation building, enhancing mastery. Certainly ways in which you can access tip sheets and tools to assess where you are currently and a little bit of where you'd like to go next. And in particular, what we hope from this webinar, that we've given you some insight to where next might lead you with some of the changes in skills and or competencies required of management and leaders of the future. And so that was kind of what we wanted to do in terms of mapping out a little bit of insight around the demographic research and skills, and certainly how the mycareer resources could help with your career planning and your skill development. So we have a few minutes now to open it up for questions, and we hope that you have some questions. There is a Q&A box that you can start to type in questions from the audience. While we wait for a few to type in, I can talk a little bit more about demographic research. So we identified 3 themes for you today. There are 4 other themes that are at play, and so we're kind of shaping a message about these 7 key themes that are coming out of the research. And we are quite excited about what will be available come September. There'll be a full report and an executive summary, as well as some infographics to tell the story in pictures, possibly a little bit of storytelling in video, as well as a emerging issues research report that we're quite excited about. And so it will seem like a lot of information, but it'll also be really good information. So we hope that you will be interested in accessing that information when it is available. And so at the moment, it doesn't look like we have any questions. And so we hope that this was of interest to everyone who attended. Thanks so much for participating. You can certainly reach out to Trevor or I after the presentation if you have any questions. But we do hope that you will access the mycareer resources, spend some time with it. There's a lot of layers there. And it may seem like quite a bit of information and exercise, but we do hope that they are useful tools in the process of you evaluating your career where you are now and where you may go in the future, with some insight from the demographic research to feed that decision-making for yourself.
Absolutely. And hopefully too, when you'll spend some time, just thinking about your career and sort of where you see yourself going. I think the assessment tools really help with that. I think the career maps really inform sort of what industry is for. So that's great. We may have a few questions.
So at the moment, it doesn't look like they're coming up on. So in principle, I'm supposed to have the questions pop up on the screen here, but they are not popping up on the screen.
I'm gonna read one up.
So our handy dandy Kasha assistant is going to read the question out loud. Thank you.
Given the specific skill gaps that you have identified, for example, analytics, how is the CIP Society or the Institute planning to support our upcoming employees in the insurance industry?
It's a really good question. We are really looking forward to the results, and for us at the Institute to have a really robust discussion of what the research is telling us. So a couple of things just as background. So in 2007, the research was saying that there was going to be a leadership gap. We could see that then. And that information in 2007 informed the level of leadership that the FCIP took on as part of the new track FCIP and the programming the curriculum development that went into that program. In 2012, still talk about management and leadership, but a little bit of that management level. The Institute then developed the Advanced CIP program, which was intended to give that kind of business acumen and that critical thinking for those at kind of maybe a team lead role, and certainly could start to build some of that foundational management leadership capacity. So those were two obvious developments that came out of the research. From a Career Connections point of view, if you will, certainly Career Connections, and I'm looking at Trevor because he heads up our Career Connections department program. We took on more recruitment initiatives to try and bring in. We'd like to take a little bit of credit for the increase of millennials in the industry through the efforts of promoting careers on post-secondary campuses and high schools and in the community. Out of the 2012 research, we knew that we wanted to create these career maps. So the mycareer was a direct result of our conversations with HR, but certainly the 2012 research was saying if we could bring people into the industry, then our next objective should be to keep them. And the intention around career maps was to demonstrate how great a career could be in the industry and where your career could go. What we're really excited about is to see what the research will tell us coming out of this 2017-2018 research. It is identifying gaps, and the internal conversations that we're having at the Institute around the future of education and around the future of programs coming out of the Institute will start to address some of those as well. So stay tuned. It should be really exciting to see what we come up with. But it is feeding internal discussions on program development for sure.
Absolutely.
One of the things that's already in development, and that is starting in September, is our commercial lines certificate program. And so you'll start to see some really great promotion around that, I hope. And that is also directly coming out of the research that is saying, as personal lines get more automated, a lot of employees in the industry and a lot of organizations are going to want to move their personal lines people, underwriters, brokers, claims people from personal line to commercial lines. And so we knew that we needed to start offering something that would help people make that transition and understand commercial that is more complex than the personal lines. And so coming September, 3-course certificate program is starting to be offered. So if that is in your career trajectory as well, pay attention to that because it looks like a really good program and should meet that need in terms of transition. So that's kind of, I don't know exactly what we're going to do around big data and analytics and all of that, and or management and leadership gap, but trust us, we're having those conversations and thinking and really thinking robust conversations about that.
Great. And then another question, Kasia?
You have another question.
Excellent.
This one for you, Trevor, about it's around how to tactfully approach talking about management with management, about getting into management with management.
I think that discussion is one that starts from a place of talking about the skills and experiences and also the knowledge and attitudes that you're already evidencing. So making sure that you can take stock that demonstrates that you're ready for that kind of opportunity. And thinking about it from a perspective of that it might be layered to help you get there. So what might be a short-term goal? So is it maybe taking on a project leadership opportunity or the opportunity to maybe contribute to taking the lead more and more with meetings, or maybe it's training a new employee, like thinking about ways that you can kind of stretch your current role, and then having the opportunity to really take that to the next level in terms of mapping out what your route might look like into a management piece. So taking a look at our leadership tip sheet or our leadership assessment in terms of what area of leadership you really want to get into and being able to clearly articulate that. Sometimes what can be difficult is when we just say, I want to get into management, it can be tough for leaders to respond in terms of what kind of leadership role are you looking for, and how might we be able to one, provide you with the opportunity to get the skills needed to be in that role, and two, do we have those kinds of roles available currently within our organization, right? So helping them identify sort of where you want to be and keeping you in mind for those kinds of pieces tact and diplomacy is really important here. It's not, I want your job tomorrow. It's important to sort of talk about, in broader strokes where you see yourself going, but really being able to evidence that readiness will help that conversation be much more robust. And not taking it underground. Don't just have it with colleagues, have it with manager and HR, because you never know where they see your career heading, and it's important to inform that for them and to help them see where you could potentially be going within the organization.
And there is another question here about how often professionals should be looking at adjusting their goals to stay current in the industry because of the pace of change.
What a good question.
That's
Would you like to talk about that?
Sure, that's a great
How
question.
often should they be looking at their skill competence?
So I think it's important on you think about it sort of the same way that business does in terms of a strategic plan and an operational plan, right? So a strategic plan, typically we know now no longer are those 2 to 3 year windows. Usually it's a year that we can see confidently. And it's probably the same in terms of your development and skills planning. You might have a longer term, a loftier goal that's off in the distance that you're working towards, but the actual strategy to how to get there usually informed 1 year out. And then that operational plan probably breaks down quarterly to sort of have a goal or an objective or something that you're working towards to help you get there.
Benchmark whether you're on track.
Absolutely, to have that conversation internally. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have completed a course in a quarter or a designation within a quarter. Sometimes that's not possible. But looking at it from the standpoint of, this is my goal, and quarterly reviewing, am I on track to be able to get there? Probably a fair time. Once a year, really deeper look, and probably or twice a year, but quarterly is kind of the checkpoints.
Some of that will fit within kind of a performance appraisal process and that
Yep.
kind of thing, but
Absolutely.
It also can be done separately. We do know that sometimes if you're thinking that education will enhance your knowledge and looking at a course, then September and January, those are kind of prime times for people to really evaluate. But it certainly is helpful for that not to be the only time looking at it or too much of a knee-jerk, I should take a course and let's just take what's off, that sort of thing, if it's not in keeping with the big picture you have in mind.
And I would treat your career like any business decision. And the reason that I say that is for example, often managers and HR professionals, they can be responsive to one-off requests, but if they can see how what it is that you're looking at fits into an overarching plan or an overarching strategy, it makes it much easier for them to say yes, right? Because they know exactly what it is that you're working towards, the why behind it. It's informed. It seems less of that knee jerk. It's more of that planful, careful thinking approach. And I think you'll find that goes a longer way in terms of getting the approval or the buy-in that you're looking for. You're ultimately in the driver's seat. We would like employees to be in a position where they're managing their career or moving it forward. Managers are there to facilitate and to be sort of that individual who is your guidepost in terms of what next steps might be appropriate or how to get there. And we're hoping that your organization is the support behind that, right? And that they're really looking for those robust kind of career and development conversations to be happening. And we're finding more and more within the industry that's just assumed. It's not necessarily even articulated as much as it could be, because that's just the philosophy that HR is adopting.
And then 2 things on note. So on your screen there is the insuranceinstitute.ca/mentoring, and so that as well, that Mentoring Advantage program is an excellent resource to help you if you were looking for a mentor to help you through that process. So if you wanted to seek out someone where you could have that quarterly conversation to see whether you're on track for your goals, the Mentoring Advantage website will help you identify and map out a way in which you could find a mentor and how you could have a relationship with that mentor. It won't find you a mentor, but it will certainly help you identify what a mentor can do for you and set up the goal. The other, just as an aside, Ideally, the company is facilitating in that. But we do, the CIP Society has a Rhine Scholarship, and it just comes to mind now. If your goal is education and your organization doesn't support it, because they don't see it tied with your job just yet, but you're trying to set yourself up for the future, and if there was, if a scholarship helped you have the money to continue with your education, then you could make application to the Rhine Scholarship.
Absolutely.
And so from our perspective, from a CIP Society point of view, we wouldn't want a financial burden to hinder your capacity to continue to learn, is kind of where that thinking comes from. So do check out the CIP Society website. And just because it's May 24th, I'll just say that the deadline is May 31st. Okay, so keep it in mind for next year maybe, or get it in fast. So there we go. And so we have no more questions, but hopefully this has been fruitful. Those were really good questions in the end, so thank you so much. And with that, we're wrapping up at our 2:15, so thank you so much for attending today.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.